We're live.
Good morning, everybody. Wait till we get a few people that are coming in here for our second webinar, and thanks for everybody for signing up and being a part of this great discussion that we had. Last week we had some great discussions, and we had actually a lot of comments that came in from everybody that gave us some good tips, and that's great. So please make sure that as you watch our webinars and you have any sort of constructive criticism, please send it in. We want to know what you have to hear, and we want to know what's the most beneficial thing that how we can sort of play these out and have a good chat with you guys about these technical items. And so, yeah, today we're going to be talking about cannabis facilities. And last week we talked about going through exit through lobbies, and that was well received. And we got a lot of comments that came in, which was fantastic. And even watching the chat go back and forth between all the attendees, that was a great exercise where we could see a lot of different opinions on some of these items, and other people could also see those other opinions of the other attendees. So that's great news. And as we go through today with our second session of this webinar, we definitely want to have the same type of engagement. So please make sure that you're engaged and you're part of the whole process, because that's the best way that we can all learn this stuff and be confident as we apply it throughout the province of Ontario. And this is important stuff. And last week we talked about egress, how important that was. And of course, when we're dealing with these cannabis facilities, it's something that we have some life and safety issues also. You know, as a building official and as an engineer or anybody who's dealing with these issues, we go along with our day, and then all of a sudden cannabis gets legalized. I remember at one point, we would go in after the fact, and there were problems. They were illegal. And now we're dealing with them in a legal sense. And so there are some particular health and safety issues. So we have to quickly get ourselves up to snuff, understanding the processes, which can be difficult. We're not all experts at all these different types of processes. And I think this is a great way for, and that's one of the things we have to do, is sort of understand the processes and how it applies to the building code. So as we move through the process today, I hope that everybody will come out of this with a great understanding and a better understanding when they first came in. And remember, try not to take offense to any of the opinions that may have, or Mandy. The idea here is for us to provide discussion and for us to provide our opinions so that we can have good discussion. That's the best way for, of course, us to get better at what we do, is to have discussions and work our way to be more confident with the actual subject matter. So one of the things you're going to notice, just like the last webinar, if this is your first webinar with us, is that we're going to send you the recording. So after the webinar is done, you will get a copy of the webinar, and we've made sure it doesn't expire this time. So, and we've reset the other one for you. So if you want to go back on the webinar, you can look at it, refresh your memory on some of the discussion. So that's a great option for you. While we're going through the subject, submit your questions anytime. Now, based on the type of question and how it works, we may or may not deal with it throughout the webinar, but what we're going to do is at the end of the webinar, if there's something that was a little bit specific and difficult to answer at the time, we might look at tackling those at the end of the webinar. If there's specific questions about slides that are simple, Mandy is going to be assisting me here, and we're going to be working on trying to use those questions to help you better understand the subject matter. And of course, like I've just talked about before, we need your opinions, because that's the best way for us to try to apply these webinars for you so that you can get out of the webinar what you were looking for.
Something to mention too, Gerald, is that on the chat screen on your right-hand side of the screen, at the bottom, you'll see it says chat mode, I think is the default. If you guys have a question, it's helpful for me to be able to go back and find them, is if you hit that toggle beside, and it should toggle you over to Q&A mode. If you do have a question, put it in the Q&A mode if you can, and then that way it kind of filters them out for me so I can find them later and we don't lose them.
Great stuff. Yeah, no, that's a great the way we can manage that. So thank you, Mandy. So of course, same as last week, today you get the same cast. Myself, Gerald Moore. I've been a building official for over 25 years, working in small and large municipalities, inspections, plan review, CBO work. I've done a little bit of everything, and working for large and small municipalities. And currently, of course, I'm working with RSM Building Consultants that support municipalities. Mandy, who's with me today, definitely a great team member that we have. and she is the Director of Plans Examination. She has about 15 years experience working with plans exam and inspections. So between the two of us, we've dealt with quite a few of these issues in the province of Ontario, helping municipalities with these cannabis facilities. So that's why today we thought we would share with you some of the things that we have dealt with as we've gone through that process. So just to give you an idea of our Let's Talk About series. So our first 4 webinars, of course, are going to be free, so that you can get an idea of what we're all about, what we do, what are these things. And we already had our first webinar on April 22nd, which was the exits through lobbies. April 29th, today, of course, is a free one on cannabis facilities. May 13th will be our next webinar on the Part 1011 story to help us meander through that complicated section of the code. And May 27th will be a discussion on mezzanine. So please, if you've already registered, the 3 that we have, the April 29th, 13th, and 27th of May, they are all registered as one package. So you've already registered for this one, you've registered for those ones, and you'll be receiving a link that will take you to those. So it won't be next Wednesday, but it'll be the following Wednesday that we'll be having that next webinar. Keep in mind that
the same link, Gerald, that they used for today's webinar then?
Yeah, we're playing with this software too, so we're not 100% sure on everything per se, but I believe you get a next link. We're going to be looking at that, and we're currently looking at that right now. So I believe you'll get a separate link.
Okay.
Keep in mind that we do have these approved by this Ontario Building Officials Association is one association that approves it, an OSET. So they're your continuing education credits. These is approved. You get a point for every hour. If today we go over an hour and a half, you'll get 2 points. Keep in mind that you should not worry about submitting these to the OBOA. Don't do it yourself. If you're dealing with the OBOA, we will do that for you. We have a list of who was at the webinar today. We know how long you've been here. So it records that. So the OBOA was quite confident that we would make sure we'd be the keeper of the points. So we have to show them how long you were here. So that's going to be all taken care of by us. Moving forward for the training sessions, starting in June, we're going to be offering 14 training sessions for $4.95. So the idea there is that every other Wednesday, you're going to log on and we're going to have other topics. And please send us some topics that you are interested in, because that's what we want to do. We've already got tons of registrants for this, so we're starting to build up the attendance list. So this is great. And once you register, we are sending out a survey asking, what do you want to talk about? It could be me. We're going to be bringing in possibly other people, because of course we need to bring in the people that are really experts at these specific areas. So keep that in mind. If you go to the right-hand side, you'll notice there's an offer button, and click the offer button. It's going to take you directly to the offer, and it'll get you signed right up for us. So once we start in June, you'll be ready to go. So of course, we're going to be providing these CPDB points to you, webinar certificates we provide, and of course the membership numbers. So we're going to start recording those membership numbers, and we already have. We had over, I think it was 200 over 200 attendees at the last webinar. So there's a little bit of an administrative work, but not a problem. We don't mind doing that.
We have a question here, Gerald. Do you offer courses instruction on Bluebeam?
We actually do. We do a lot of in-class. We've already been doing some in-class instruction on Bluebeam. Because of the pandemic, we've sort of had to switch gears, and we're currently looking at ways that we can offer some of these webinars through Bluebeam. So stay tuned, because definitely that is on our list to provide some help and training with regards to Bluebeam.
Nancy's got a question here. Is the membership for individuals or office as a whole? We had that question last week too.
Yeah. The offer, of course, is for each individual person. The idea is, of course, because we submit these for CPDB points, you have to be individually registered. So your name is on the register and your time that's associated with it. So that is per person, like a training course. So it's per person. If you do it more than one person, unfortunately, we can only assign the CPDB points to a person. So, but that membership, of course, is for a single person. If you're a large municipality, please send us an email. We can look at how many people you have and if we can give a discount based on the number of people. Okay. So Get myself headed here on the right slide. So just like last week, let's do a poll. Give us an idea of where you're from, what you do, essentially what you do. So the idea here is that it helps Mandy and I understand who's out in the audience there. And so if you look on your right-hand side, you'll notice that there's a poll. And if you could start clicking your answers in there, it gives us an idea of who you are, where you're coming from, and how you're dealing with cannabis facilities in a plans examination or a building code compliance role. So as I can see here, it's very similar to last week. Looks like we've got about 60% of inspectors, 30% plans examiners with some engineering technologists in the room also. So that's fantastic, and a few people that fit into their own category with a special interest in this group. So great, thanks for getting us that information. That's great stuff. It helps us understand who we have in the room.
Gerald, we just going back to the offers, we've got a few more questions on that, so we might as well address those now, if you don't mind. Someone's asking about OBOA discount for webinars, if there's a discount through OBOA.
At the present time, we don't have any certain discounts through the OBOA, but we can definitely address anybody's questions if they send us an email. We can discuss those for sure.
And what if you're a supervisor?
It would be like any other type of member, of course. If you sign up for the technical issues, you'd be getting CPDP points. So you would definitely need to work at a subscription there. The good thing with the subscription too is that we're looking at also you being able to keep a catalog of all of the webinars that we do. So you're definitely getting a good value here. You're getting a value of discussions that have happened and a bit of an archive to go back and look. All right, so let's go back to our next poll. How much do you know about OBC issues related to cannabis facilities? Let's do another poll here to give us an idea of what kind of knowledge we have out there in the group, so that we can help you work through the webinar itself. I know when this first came across my table, I thought, oh, what could be an issue? It's just a plant. It's like any other greenhouse. I can't see there being an issue. And, as building officials, we don't get the red flags when these technologies first come out, even as a designer. We really don't. Someone just says, hey, I need to do this. And then you start working through it, realizing, okay, there are some issues here that we really need to look at. And of course, it looks like the biggest group we have here is that, there is people that are struggling with the understanding of this stuff. It's coming across their desk. It's brand new to them. And we're really getting a good stretch between I have heard there are issues, but I know nothing, and I know a little bit about it, but I struggle understanding it. So that's great. So today, let's really get into the details here. So you will get an understanding. So when you are dealing with these permit applications, or you're an engineer and you're dealing with the design, you can have your red flag items that you're going to be like, okay, double check this, double check this. Of course, as we know with building code, when you start getting into one item, it can dig deeper into others. We are going to try not to do that. I think, there will be other future webinars, maybe on some specific issues. But right now, we want to deal with cannabis facilities. We're dealing with this type of project. What are the big things we look for and big things to ask for? So that's what we're going to focus on today during the webinar. So here we are.
Gerald, sorry, we have a few people saying that the polls aren't appearing on their screen.
I see.
I'm not sure how it looks on their end.
Well, we're going to have a few more polls. We did get I did get some data in there, so we will have another poll, and they'll be able to for sure enter into that.
Perfect.
So for today on the agenda, I definitely want to talk about cannabis, of course. We want to talk about the cannabis processes. What are we worried about? What do we need to be concerned about? Farm versus industrial, that is definitely something that has come across our desk a couple times. Which one? What do we do? I want to deal with a cannabis facility as a farm building, and then I want to deal with it as an industrial building. There's some similarities and there's some slight differences. So between those two categories, we've kind of decided and we've organized our webinar that way. So here's our next webinar. Here's our next poll. So if you go to the right-hand side, you'll notice there's buttons on the right-hand side, and you'll see that there is a poll area. If you click that poll area, you'll see the different ways that you can answer this question. And our poll is, what are the processes in a cannabis facility that we need to be concerned about? So if you look over at the side, you'll be able to enter your polls and get you some numbers here so that you can realize and see what everybody else thinks regarding these cannabis facilities. And boy, it is a even Steven draw across the board. It is pretty much even. People are concerned about the fertilizer use and storage, the extraction of the oils, high combustible content, and some people are very truthful. I am not sure what I need to be worried about with a cannabis facility, especially if you've never had it come across your desk yet. Really, you probably have not dealt with it. So good stuff there. So here we go. Yeah, it's an even Steven draw right across all of them, it looks like. So this is good. We're going to have some good discussions today. And again, please feel free to add some questions or some chat at the bottom on your chat screen. Well, let's talk about what we think are some issues that you need to be concerned about when you're dealing with cannabis processes. And of course, when we're dealing with cannabis processes, they're going to be doing the growing of the cannabis plant itself. They're cultivating the plant. So once they're finished growing, they cultivate, and then they, of course, harvesting. So like we looked at in that last poll, there's going to be some combustible content in this particular area of the building. So that might be something that we're concerned about. So the growing, cultivating, and harvesting is definitely something that we have in those buildings. When we're dealing with the drying of the material, that could be something that we could be concerned about. Of course, their packaging. And then we're going to be also talking about the extraction of the cannabis oils itself. And I think as we start going up through this issue here, you're going to start to realize that really the biggest issue that we need to worry about is the extraction of the oils. And it's the process of how those oils are extracted that can become the issue that we need to be concerned about with regards to cannabis facilities. So what I want to do right now is I want to bring up a short little YouTube video I found. It's only 3 minutes. And really, I like it because it talks about and shows it shows one of the extraction methods that there are with regards to cannabis to help you understand why the extraction of the oils can be an issue. So we'll cue that video up for you right now, and we'll bring that up on. All right, well, I'm glad everybody could get an idea with regards to that video there. I think I liked it because it was short snippet and it talked about how they get these oils out of the plants. And I think that's the hazard. And as you heard, they were using ethanol. Not all of them use ethanol. Most of them that I've seen use ethanol. There's other processes. Of course, on the slide, you can see we've got the use of ethanol. And the idea is that you take a solvent and you bath the plant material in the solvent, and that is what separates out all the materials, the different types of I think they call it anoids that they use in order to make these medicines or recreational type oils. And so ethanol is one way to do that. Ethanol, of course, then the idea is, how do I get the ethanol, the residual, out of the actual material? And there's a lot of ways they do that. I know with ethanol, they have to use an extreme low freezing point. So that's why a lot in these facilities, you'll see some very high-tech freezers that bring the temperatures down in order to help with that solvent. We also, of course, have a lot of sieves and a lot of distillation to take out that particular ethanol, because you don't want that in the final plant. They've used butane, ether. Another one I've seen, of course, is rosin, which I don't see a lot. Rosin is mostly high pressure and high temperature. Literally, the person that figured it out really took a hair straightener, put the buds in between the two plates, and squeezed really, really hard, and was able to get some of the oils out. So I don't know if you'll see that in a large facility, but it is an option. Some of the new technologies that we're seeing, of course, is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide can be used as a solvent in order to separate these. The difference, though, is that in order to make this a liquid, you need extremely high pressures. So these particular facilities have other issues related to pressurization, and also, of course, the fact that if a room was full of carbon dioxide, I can't breathe. So there's some issues related to those type of facilities also. So now that we kind of got an idea of what the issue is, let's talk about a cannabis facility and whether you consider that to be a farm building or an industrial building, or maybe you're going to tell me it depends. So on the right-hand side, of course, I have another poll to get an idea of what everybody in the group thinks that a cannabis facility should be. This, of course, is without having some high-level training or anything, but it's sort of an idea of what we think that it is. And it looks like if we are at the side here as the poll's going on, we're going to publish you the results at the end, but it looks like we have a split between industrial building and it depends. We're about 50-50 with a few others that aren't sure, and some of them, not very many, are saying straight it's a farm building. So that gives us an idea of what we are seeing out there, is that there is a bit of confusion. And I know when we first started dealing with these issues, that's what happened, is we're like, okay, let's start scratching our heads. Which way are we going to look at this particular facility? So first, I want to talk about farm buildings. And I know the Farm Building Code is an old document. It has not been updated since 1995. There's been a lot of work done in order to update that document, but it's old and it's very thin. So there isn't as many requirements, of course, in the farm code. So it does make a difference if you're in a farm or if it's being treated through industrial. Of course, we're growing plants. So someone's going to say to us, why is this not a farm building? I'm growing tomato, and on the other side, I'm growing cannabis. How can it be any different? So, of course, one of the big things that you have to have, of course, and I'm sorry I went ahead a little too fast, is that no residential. Of course, when you're in a farm building, there cannot be any residential occupancies within that building. So that, of course, takes away any option of it being a farm building. We don't see that much at cannabis facilities, so I don't know if that would be sort of the biggest issue that you've seen. Of course, it has to be on land associated with farming. And this is coming out of the definitions. And you'll notice a lot of times when you go through our slides, we have our code references in the bottom corner. And that helps you understand this as you look through it later on. If you have the code with you right now, of course, it's a great opportunity to go through it. It may be difficult with sort of the pace that we go through this material, but I think when you look at it in the replay, you'll be able to sort of follow up and understand where we're getting this information from. So in order for a cannabis facility to be even considered as a farm building, it has to be on land associated with farming. So that comes from, of course, our zoning bylaws. And in the zoning bylaw, it's going to indicate whether that property is zoned for farming. So we've had a couple of projects that came in that asked for classifications with regards to an agricultural building. But when we looked at the zoning, it was zoned industrial. So there'd be no way that we could classify that building as a farm building because it's not on land associated with farming. And I think that is an important key element. So when you first get these in, you need to associate the zoning with how you classify the building. Now where it gets a little tricky, of course, is when we look at the definitions of these two different types of buildings. So when we started to look at the first two elements of a farm building, and we saw that it has to be no residential and it has to be associated with farming. Well, of course, then it goes on to say these are the uses that we have in a farm building, and of course, production, storage, or processing of agricultural or horticultural produce or feeds. So in this particular case, is cannabis, in your building, would it fit into that particular section there? Whether they're producing the product, they're storing the product, they're processing the product. So the argument is, of course, is that even though it seems like when you look at the building, you look at this building in the center here, that happens to be a cannabis facility. Is that a industrial building or farm building? You're not going to be able to tell by looking at it. And I'll tell you, my friends down in Kingsville, I was down there a couple months ago, and they took me through the greenhouses that we're getting for these cannabis facilities. And boy, I tell you, you walk into that front building and if you're just inside the building only, you're like, I'm in an industrial building. But clearly it fits into the farm building requirement because it meets the definition of farm, and it's on a property that's dedicated for farm use, and it's for the production of agricultural and horticultural feeds. So although it may not look like a farm building from the inside, when we look at the definitions of a farm building, there is definitely that argument to be made that this is a farm building, just like I'm, picking up mushrooms in the field or tomatoes, bringing them in, processing the tomatoes. I'm doing the same thing for the cannabis. When we go over to industrial buildings, of course, really it comes down to the zoning. So if we don't have zoning that supports it, and this facility is in an industrial zoned area, then we deal with an industrial building. And I've seen both. I seem to find places where we're seeing them both in Ontario and probably throughout the country, because it really depends on where they decide to set up shop. Any particular questions, Mandy, that we have specific towards this, or should we keep going and move on to one of the next sections?
Yep, no, I think you're okay to keep going.
Okay, good stuff. That's great. I know that one that you had, Mandy, recently, it was, wasn't that one in with some air-covered structures?
Yeah, and the issue there was it was almost limiting with what they could do with the building, because it was zoned for agricultural use, so they weren't able to have any manufacturing on the site, so they had to do it in the reverse almost.
Yeah, that one was zoned. I think
They
yeah,
had
that
to
one
keep
was.
it as farm building.
Yeah, that one particular, it was zoned industrial, but they went in under a farm building, and so we had to work through those issues with them on that one. So when we're going through the compliance path, of course, we look at, okay, I've got this building here, and I'm trying to decide which way do I go in the code. And the compliance path, of course, is something that we're going to always focus on in these webinars, because I think it's very important to be able to use that building code and understand how to get through from one section to the other. I know when you start using the code for many years, you start jumping all over the place. But sometimes it's good to take a reflection and go, how did I get here again? And maybe step back to those old days and say, let me step through it right from the beginning. It's really important, because a lot of times we can get stuck off on a section and we're like, should I even be here? And that's really what we want to always focus on. When we're talking about farm buildings and industrial buildings, we really need to look at, how does the code tell us where to go from one to the other? And of course, when we're looking at this particular slide here, you can see a farm building right at the very beginning of Division A talks about how it splits off from the building code. So some people think, oh, we go straight to the Canadian Farm Building Code. Actually, no, you still start out in the Ontario Building Code. And then when we go through it, it's then going to take us on that path. And of course, 1312 says, if you meet these criteria, you go to the Canadian Farm Building Code, and that's what this is about here. So when we're dealing with those definitions at the very beginning, and you see yourself fit into that Farm Building Code slot, guess what? You're going to then be thrown into the Canadian Farm Building Code. If you don't meet the provisions with regards to a farm building, then you get to stay in the building code. You don't get kicked out. You stay in it, and then we deal through the actual Ontario Building Code with compliance with cannabis facilities. Yes, there is similarities, and yes, things are the same, but I think it's very easy to understand, or it's very important to understand how that direction happens and how you get each specific group.
Gerald, we've got a question here. Is an office component permitted on a farm building?
So I've dealt with a few farm buildings in the province, and the bigger these barns get, the more different occupancies that get added to them. And I think, as we start looking at these, we really need to ask that question. And when you look at the definition of a farm building in the Ontario Building Code, it does talk about the different types of uses that can be permitted in a farm building, and it gives a statement as such as. So it doesn't, I know it doesn't specifically say an office portion, but it does say and uses such as, and then it lists out certain different types of occupancies that can be within a farm building. And so I think there is an argument to be made that yes, you can have an office portion within a farm building that meets the Farm Building Code. Yes, it does seem like, wow, they seem to be really getting away with a lot, but it's an old document and it is the law. I know that's probably why they're adding a lot more provisions when we get into the Canadian Farm Building Code upgrade. And I think anyone who's been doing any work within that group can start to see that there are some allowances. I know I was pretty restrictive when I first looked at this stuff, but I'm starting to see from the new code that's coming out that they are addressing these issues, and we are seeing those uses permitted when the new code comes out. So I guess the that was the long answer, but I think, yes, there's an argument to be made that, yes, an office portion can be within a farm building. Sometimes we see small little boardrooms. I've seen some cattle facilities where they have a mezzanine where they're looking over, where they bring the sales team in and show the customer what their special heifers look like and all their special, the pigs or the goats, and they're really selling it. So I have seen that happen.
We got another question here. Any difference between outside growing operations and inside growing in terms of farm versus industrial?
So I think with regards, if it was outside, it's not relative to a building. Really, we're dealing with cannabis facilities that are growing things inside a building or are being used inside. So maybe if they have a compound or something, but only if it's related to a building would we be dealing with it in the building code anyways, not sort of on an exterior.
And then one more question kind of relating to zoning. Can you separate a farm building and an F2 on agricultural zoned land?
Well, I think it really comes down to the zoning. So if you've got the zoning that says it's farm building, why would you as a designer want to even entertain an F2 industrial? Because you get you're on land that's dedicated for farming. There's no need to make it F2. It's a farm building. So egress, of course, when we're dealing with farm buildings, it's a lot less loose, a little looser. When we're dealing with buildings in the Ontario Building Code, it's all about floor area, exit from floor area. And floor area is defined as essentially a story. So it's every floor plate. But when we're dealing with the Farm Building Code, it talks about egress from the building. So we do get some issues a lot with these mezzanines and these office occupancies that are still within the farm building. And so we're not dealing with getting off of the floor plate directly outside, it's just getting out of the building. So there's differences there. One of the things I've noticed that I know it was probably not the intent for it ever to be there for cannabis facilities, but it does reduce the travel distance in farm buildings if there's liquid fuel storage. Now, I know it's not being used as fuel, but it's being used for this cannabis extraction, but it is something to consider. Is that applicable here? Definitely something to consider with regards to the extraction. So when you hear that word extraction, you see a room on a floor plan as a plans examiner and you're doing a farm building and they say it's cannabis, I think the red flag that you want is their extraction, and this might appeal to that. Of course, there's the 45 meters travel distance in the buildings, and of course, 60-meter perimeter exits are permitted in the Farm Building Code. So the extractions, that is what we are really focused on. And when we're looking at these particular slides and we're looking at these extraction methods, that's where we really want to focus on. So when you give your first efficiency letter back, you want to say, okay, you've indicated a room called extraction room, or another term I see is winterization room, because a lot of times they're freezing. Remember, we talked about the freezing process. So when you see those terms, I think you want to ask the question, maybe for any cannabis facility, is there going to be some extraction of the cannabis oils on site? And when that happens, the building code in the farm code area, so what it says is if you're a farm building, normally you go straight to the Canadian Farm Building Code. But just in January, the Ontario Building Code was updated to add some provisions to specifically deal with Farm Building Code. A lot of times I was dealing with it through the fire code directly, the use, but now the building code has been updated that gives us some tools to basically throw them into the Ontario Fire Code requirements for these flammable and combustible liquids that are being used. So it's that ethanol. It's that ethanol that's being used to get out those particular important materials. That is what we're concerned about. So in the building code, it sends us to it sends us right to the Ontario Fire Code. Now, a question that I seem to get quite a few times is when I'm referenced to the fire code out of the building code, who enforces it? Well, of course, typically it's whoever is a building official. So yes, it's in the fire code. So some people might think it's a fire prevention officer. And you know what? There might be some municipalities that have their fire departments appointed as building officials for this purpose. So they would do it. But in small municipalities, if you've been referenced to the Ontario Fire Code, it's now up to you, just like NFPA 13 or any other particular document, you have been then thrown into this other document. It is now enforced through the Ontario Building Code. So when we look at this particular provision, it sends us to the fire code. So for farm buildings, there's 3 particular items that the Ontario Building Code sends you directly to the Ontario Fire Code for. And the first is door latching. In these cannabis facilities, we always have high-end security. So you're going to be having a lot of passage, electric strikes. You might have some mag locks, ways to restrict access into certain buildings. And I think as an inspector, what I would always do is I would always make sure that I can get out of that room and out of that building without having to put in any security code. It's okay if the alarms go off and security starts running towards you. That's okay, but they cannot have it so that there is an egress issue with regards to these rooms. So definitely something you want to check. As a plans examiner, you want to maybe ask that question. And as an inspector, they tell you not to open the door without putting the password in, but I always open it just because I'm going to test it out. I need to make sure that I can get out of that room without using any particular issue with keys or whatnot. It sends you to the flammable ventilation measures for flammable liquids in Part 4 of the Ontario Fire Code, and it also sends you to flammable gas provisions with regards to the Ontario Fire Code. So these 3 issues have been spurred on directly from the Ontario Building Code to ensure that the fire code provisions get enforced in a farm building. So door latching, we talked already about that. It really brings the same requirements that are kind of in the building code. It has to be readily opened from the inside, a single operation, no keys and no special knowledge. So set those alarms off for the test day. It's not to say you're taking any of that valuable material, but we need to ensure there is no egress, stopping of the egress of that room. When we're dealing with farm buildings, of course, the 2 other issues that it sent us through is ventilation measures for flammable liquids and ventilation measures for flammable gas. So what we should see in these rooms, we're going to be seeing sensors, LEL sensors, which is the lower explosive limit sensors, and there's very specific provisions that the fire code asks us to do. And this is a generalization of it. I know if we start getting into some more questions, we might look at getting a little more into it, but really flammable liquids and combustible liquids in Part 4 of the Ontario Fire Code is a big section, very complicated section. So definitely, I think when you are getting into these issues, you really need to have an expert on the consultant team. So you need to be saying to the designer, I need to have a report, or I need somebody on your team that can go through these specific measures and ensure that the Part 4 or Part 5 of the Ontario Fire Code has been met. We want to see interlocks to stop the generating equipment. There has to be alarms when go off when the LEL is exceeded. There is a NFPA 91 hood system that's in this building, and there's specified locations of low inlets and low out and high outlets. So there's a real issue with your mechanical engineer there. So if you're a mechanical engineer, you may be able to go through these provisions, or you may be getting some type of fire protection engineer. And I've seen a few of them out there now that are really focusing on this stuff. So if you're a building official, I think you want to be asking. And if you're on the consultant side, I think you want to be bringing somebody on your team, because there is specific issues with regards to dispensing and storage, open containers, and so on and so forth. This ethanol that a lot of them are using, it's a Class 1 liquid, so there are some very important provisions that need to be added for the ventilation to ensure that we don't have somebody or a flammable issue in that particular room.
You know, and something to note, Gerald, it's something that seems to be readily available. Like, I haven't had a problem on any of the permits when I ask for that. It's not always provided right up front, but as soon as I ask for the report, they can provide it to me. So I think they're doing it anyways, and it's any of the reports I've read are very good in terms of spelling out the processes, what's involved, and what's required. So just taking a good read through those reports usually justify what's going on in that building.
Yeah, no, that's good. And to go through the steps. And I think when you get that report in, you want to open up your Ontario Fire Code and you want to follow up to ensure that you are following how the engineer is going through those items, and just, double check that they've covered them off. But, getting that expertise on the team is definitely essential.
We got a question here. Are these requirements just for the extraction areas?
Yes, essentially the extraction areas. Now, when we're talking about, and this is what we're going to talk about on this poll here, is that do we need to be concerned about other issues with regards to cannabis? And I think really it's that extraction area that's the number one issue that we need to look at. We're going to still keep talking about some of these processes as we get into the industrial section because they're really applicable to both. But yes, essentially it's that extraction that's the number one issue you want to look at.
We got a few more questions here from Andy. We're going to go back a little bit. Andy's specifically talking about these hoop houses. So we have seen, like, I'm assuming these greenhouse type structures, and that's what he's referring to. He's asking, would this be considered a building?
Well, yeah, that gets us into the fun of these hoop houses. I've always enjoyed those discussions with people that want these hoop houses. They move around the property. I tend to say to them, listen, keep them apart in less than 600 square meters or 60 square meters, and they're not a building, so I don't have to worry about them. But I think if you've got a hoop house and I doubt you'd get extraction in them, but people try anything. If they had it, it's a building and it's got extraction, it's got to be dealt with, whether it's a hoop house or a building.
One more question. Someone saying the facilities in our jurisdiction have been moving to the CO2 extraction system to eliminate many of these hazards.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are other hazards with CO2 extraction, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. But essentially, with the CO extraction, you're dealing with a couple other issues. So CO2 itself is not flammable, so you're not dealing with the issues with extraction. Specifically in the building code, I know there's some NFPA standards that come out of the United States with regards to protections of CO2 extraction. But essentially the issue with that is that it's under extreme pressure. So because it's under extreme pressure, you've got some issues there, which likely, I'm not 100%, it's a good question whether TSSA gets involved with regards to the installation of those. But we've got issues of, there has to be blow-offs, and these blow-offs have to go to the exterior. Because if we had a discharge of CO2 in that room, it would suffocate all the individuals inside the room. So there are hazards with regards to health and safety. I was, from my research, there wasn't a lot of specific direction in the Ontario Building Code, but definitely through the Ontario Health and Safety Act. So as we move along, let's talk about moving. We've talked a little bit about farm, and we've talked about those three provisions that it's referred to in the Ontario Fire Code. So we are still dealing with that extraction issue. Is it an F2? Is it an F1? In a farm building, there's no such thing. So really, we're only dealing with it as a farm building, and we're dealing with it as those three specific issues, which really bring the same issues as an industrial building anyway. So we have to deal with a farm building specifically to those three, because again, when we follow the path of compliance, you go right to the farm code. There is no going to part 3 and classifying it. But we will get into the classification when we get into the next part. So I've got a poll on the screen. I'm not sure if we've started that poll yet, but let's start talking about that. That looks like, would a cannabis facility be classified as a high, medium, or low hazard industrial occupancy? I can see here that we've got a lot of people have already answered their questions. A lot of people are looking at these and saying it's an F2. But we do have some F1, and of course we've got the it depends. That's a great answer, because you know what, sometimes it definitely does depend. So we'll get those published, those results up there, so that everybody can see what we've got for answers on what people are thinking the classification is for these particular facilities. So to kind of have a bit of a discussion on these that particular poll, let's talk about it. And I think maybe this might be a refresher to quite a few of you, but it's definitely a good discussion point, is that when we're dealing with industrial buildings, of course, we have 3 different types depending on the type of hazard. And when we're dealing between an F2 building and an F3, there's that special number that the code gives us within the definitions that talks about the 50 kilograms per meter square of combustible content. So we can have up to, if we're over the 50 kilograms per meter square, if we're more than, then we're an F2. If we're less than, we're F3. We also, though, and some people forget this, is that it's not just about how much combustible material is in the building, it's about how combustible is that material. So we also have to look at the energy output. And 1,200 megajoules per meter square is the other factor we have to look at. you may have less than 50 kilogram meter square of combustible material, but if you're over the 1200 megajoules for the combustibility, you are in F2. So you have to check both. Many times when I look at reports, I see that they've only dealt with the combustible content, and I have to say, listen, you've also got to look at the combustibility too. I need to see that both of those factors are less than, or not more than, in order to keep it in the F3. My typical stance has been, if you want to be an F3, other than if you're maybe a concrete plant or something, I want to see calculations, because we need to be able to see that you are either above or below. Now,
And we
when you
have
get
had a
into
couple, Gerald,
yeah,
that have come in as F3. So I mean, it is something some of them are proving, but we've also heard too that it's a fine line. If they want to expand in the future, it might throw them into F2. So a lot of them are better just to go F2 right from the get-go.
Yeah, very good point. And I think if we look at overall, like when I first started looking at these cannabis facilities, I was thinking F2, but a lot of them were saying, listen, there really isn't a lot of combustible material in these growing areas. The growing areas have little plant material because the plants are small compared to the, to the amount of soil and everything else is in there. So to me, I wouldn't be extremely excited about seeing any type of F3 for these occupancies, especially not in the extraction area. When we have this building and we classify it as a major occupancy F3, because the major reason they're there and the most space is dedicated to the growing, that's fine with me. But then when we're dealing with, of course, the area that they're doing the extraction, we have a different issue. It's not about how much material or how combustible it is. Of course, when we look at this particular slide, you can see an F1 doesn't talk about how much, or it doesn't give us numbers. It simply talks about a special fire hazard. And when we look at this building, do we have a special fire hazard? And I think generally speaking, we do with regards to the extraction areas. So does that mean that we classify these extraction areas as F1? I think there's definitely an argument for that because it is a special fire hazard. It's requiring you to have special provisions through the combustible liquids and the combustible gases through the fire code. So I think there's definitely an argument that this might not be a major occupancy F1, but it's a subsidiary F1 within an F3 major occupancy. And there's definitely some good discussions with that when you talk about, is the whole building an F1? I would say no, unless it was just dedicated for extraction. But a lot of these facilities, they're generally there to grow, and then they have a smaller area dedicated to extraction. So I think with our industrial buildings, we're probably going to have a mix between we could have any of them, but like you said, Bandy, but I think F3 for some of the growing areas and F1 for the extraction room. Unless they use CO2, and we talked about the fact that the CO2 extraction does not use flammable gases. So like someone had said in the chat that a lot of people are moving on to a CO2 extraction method. Definitely with regards to flammable gases and flammable liquids, it is safer. And if you had CO2 extraction, then I don't think there would be any argument. I don't think you would have any special fire hazard that would throw you into the F1 category for perhaps that subsidiary room. So when we're moving on to industrial buildings, someone asked if we have a checklist here. Well, I have a roadmap. Is a roadmap good enough? I will see. Let's go through this roadmap, Paul, and see if that helps us a little bit. What I've done here on this chart is I've kind of talked about where we go and where we're referenced. And this is with regards in a Part 9 small building or whether we're in a large Part 3 building. And in this particular section, you can see that there is a couple of areas that we're being sent to when we're dealing with these cannabis facilities. And really, it's the flammable liquids, right? The CO2 extraction wouldn't apply because we don't have any specific issues with flammable liquids. But when we're dealing with the ethanol, which is the most popular that I see, here are the issues that you're going to be dealing with. And really, a lot of them will send you to the same parts, depending if you're Part 9 or Part 3, you're being sent to the same areas. So in large buildings of Part 3, in the 2 code changes ago, they had a new section added, 336, which is design of hazardous areas. That is an important section. Whether you're dealing with a Part 9 or Part 3, you are being sent to 336. And that section is specific to flammable combustible liquids, flammable compressed gases or any type of compressed gas, dangerous goods, so on and so forth, asbestos, or any of the, for fertilizers is what I'm getting at there. So those sections are being pointed out through Part 9 and Part 3. Hazardous dusts, gases, and liquids. When we get into Part 6 of the code, it talks about the protections we need within our mechanical HVAC systems. And of course, 6.2.13 is referred with regards to laboratories. So a lot of times we're using laboratories in these cannabis facilities, a laboratory environment in order to extract. So we're going to have these specific code items that will be pointed out and have to be dealt with throughout the design process. So as I go through, I've created some slides that just sort of drill down a little bit on these particular requirements. And of course, when we deal with 336 in the building code, it sends us to two different areas: flammable and combustible liquids and flammable compressed gases. And they take you to the Ontario Fire Code. And that can be another section that we can talk about later, is what do we need to look for in there? And essentially, you're talking about what types of ventilation, which is also talked about. The ventilation requirements is talked about in Part 6 of the code, and it sends you, of course, to the fire code here. We've got storage restrictions. So when we're dealing with flammable combustible liquids, we have incidental use, and sometimes we have maybe more of a primary use. This would typically be incidental, but there's going to be very specific milestones on how much liquid is being installed and what type. Can we use cabinets? So you've probably seen those ULC cabinets. So if you have up to a certain amount, you can put them in the cabinets. It depends sometimes on if it's an open container or if it's a closed container. Sometimes it's just storage. Sometimes it's storage and dispensing. So all of these factors are going to be brought into account through the Ontario Fire Code. So there is a lot of issues, and that's why it's good to have somebody with a lot of experience in Part 4 when you get a design professional providing, a mechanical engineer or someone to provide it, because they need to be able to tell you how much material, what type of material, and what type of storage. When we get into the cabinet storage, if you go over that amount, you may have to go into a storage room. And those particular rooms might have to have fire separations, and you're going to maybe have to have explosion venting for that particular room. So we can get quite detailed when we get into Part 4 of the fire code, but this is pointing you to that. So that's why I think you really need to have some expertise, review it, and get it back to you. I know I've struggled a little bit, and maybe if you're on the design side, you may have said, I struggle with this too. But a lot of times when we're dealing with hazardous materials and hazardous substances, when we're on the building code matrix, there's that one box. That box says, are there any hazardous substances? And I think some people tend to just go, no. It's like their common reaction, no. And sometimes you need to dig in a little bit deeper and say, well, you're a cannabis facility, sir. So I think, are you using any extraction? Well, yes. Are you using any solvent like ethanol? Yes. Well, maybe you should have checked yes there. And I'm going to need you to have somebody look at this, because if we don't have any type of specifications on the amounts and what type, then it has to be known, because that's how we deal with Part 4. So anyways, I think this definitely is something that is going to have to be looked at when you're dealing with these cannabis facilities. Laboratories, 6.2.13 in the hazardous, in Part 6 of the code, it deals with these rooms being used as laboratories. Now, the problem is that it's not a defined term. So I have gotten a little bit of pushback in the past of, why are you saying this is a laboratory? Well, I think if we look at the common definition of a laboratory, in my opinion, it meets it. Maybe we have some people here that might think otherwise, but that is something that we have here. So you might get some little bit of pushback when you ask for a laboratory. In my opinion, I think it meets the definition of a laboratory. So I've been asking for these provisions. Generally speaking, though, there's a few more prescriptive requirements, but it does send you to Part 4 of the fire code too. But it's the use of those flammable combustible liquids. When you looked at it in the video, you can see that they're essentially mixing the plants with this hazardous material, this flammable liquid. So it needs to be dealt with through ventilation, enclosure construction. So a power ventilated enclosure is another way that they sort of look at this room, because this room itself is power ventilated. We don't want to have any situations where that particular vapor can be really large in the room to cause an explosion hazard. So that's the idea of these particular provisions.
I think, Gerald, too, it's important to understand per project. I'm finding when I'm getting these permits, they're not consistently labeling the rooms and the use within those rooms across the board yet. So that might come as these become more common. But for instance, I've had one where they call it a winterization room. Well, the actual use of that room varied a lot from one project to the next. So I think just really understanding, and that comes from reading these fire reports, is what's going on for that particular building, not to assume that it's the same use just because it's all called winterization rooms across the board.
Very good point. You're right. One project, it was a laboratory. The second project, it wasn't a laboratory. So yeah, no, good. That's a very good point, Mandy. So I think as a plans examiner and even a designer, that's where you need to do a little more poking. What do we actually, what isn't it called? What are you actually doing in there?
Yeah.
I know that I've dealt with go ahead.
You go ahead. We've got a question on the board though, so when you're ready.
I see a question here. One of the things I've noticed is with regards to inhaling the actual plant material itself and mechanical ventilation. So when we're dealing with these particular issues with regards to ventilation of laboratories and other stuff, you can do continuous mechanical ventilation or natural or some combination through the design parameters. So that can be done. If you're dealing with just the growing of it itself and the dusts and stuff that come off of that, it's really not something that's specific through the building code itself, but I have seen a lot of manufacturers that are providing that because of the cannabis regulations and under the Ontario Health and Safety Act. So I think due to those things, we're going to have particular ventilation. Now, of course, there are provisions in Part 6 that says you have to provide ventilation in accordance with ASHRAE standards. So maybe that might play into it, where you have to ensure that you have proper ventilation for the use that's in that building.
Another question here is, can the growing area considered in controlled atmosphere due to CO requirements for the plants?
So I think if you're dealing with,
like
if you're dealing with the carbon dioxide provisions and you're using the solvent with the carbon dioxide, it's a high pressure area. There are issues related to health and safety on those, but nothing specific in the building code other than through Health and Safety Act with regards to the asphyxiation, or if the stuff is discharged into the room, it can cause an issue of people essentially drowning in CO2. So if we sort of go and look at the issue with regards to industrial buildings on egress, just to kind of bring this together and match it up with what we were dealing with in the farm buildings, of course, an unsprinklered building, we'd be dealing with 30 meters, whereas 45 meters in a farm building. So travel distances are definitely a little different. And of course, we have 60-meter perimeter exits. That's the same as we have in the farm code. So that's pretty much, you can do the 60-meter perimeter. But of course, the issue of an F1 and the high hazard occupancies in these extraction rooms, we would be looking at the 25 meters. So I think definitely there's a few more things that are a little bit different that make this an interesting difference between that farm building and an industrial building itself. So sort of give a recap, we talked a lot about cannabis processes, the compliance path. I think if anybody has any more questions, they can sort of keep ending them in there, putting them in there, and we'll see what we can do as we tackle these particular issues. And so when you get one that comes across your desk, you're gonna have a little bit of help with regards to, I remember what they talked about. Let's ask that question. As building officials and as designers designing these buildings, we have to definitely ask some questions, because that's what we do. We ask questions because a lot of times they're not putting that stuff right out in our face. We've got to ask questions to get that information. I want to put up another poll here as we start to get into the end of the presentation. And as we move forward, I want to get an idea of what kind of topics, what are you guys interested in? We want to keep doing these webinars. We want to keep bringing up more interesting topics so that we can have some good discussions and share and compare notes. So please, on the right-hand side, again, we have our poll box, and we have a lot of different items that we've put up there. Please enter your information, and we'll keep track of this. If there's something that's not on the list, just send us an email. We'd definitely be interested in what we hear. So as we move forward after June, we want to have a good slew of titles. Next week, we'll be sort of disclosing what all those titles are. I want to get a good mix. I want to get a mix between Part 9, Part 3, and the Building Code Act itself, and then maybe any other topics that we want to sort of dabble in with regards to code compliance in our buildings in Ontario. So yeah, definitely bring those things up. Looks like we've got lots of people that are entering different sections. It's pretty across the board. So this will definitely help us out as we move forward to create some more good content for you, so that you can start your Wednesdays all vigorated, ready to jump out onto the sites and to jump into those plan reviews or designs. So what we'll do is we'll publish that poll. That'll give you guys an idea of what other people are thinking on these particular topics that are coming up.
Gerald, do they have the ability to pick multiple selections on those polls, or is there?
I don't think so. So that might be one of the weaknesses with doing a poll for our. I could see how everyone was kind of deciding. I like this one. Oh, maybe this one's better because the numbers were going up and back. We're looking on a way to integrate our surveys. When we're dealing with this software, some things are easy, some things aren't, and we notice that surveys aren't easy. There's a lot of integration, so we're working on getting the surveys out. But please, just like last week, send us your comments. Tell us how we did today. How was it different from last week? Did you like it better? Did you think we should have added more? Definitely give us some comments, send us some emails. We don't take offense to it, because really the only way we're going to get better is to get some great input from everybody that's in the group. So definitely thank you for coming. Before we sort of talk about our question period, I just wanted to go over sort of the offers again. We're going to be back for May 13th. So definitely put that on your calendar. We're going to talk about the Part 1011 story, the story of how to meander through renovations and change of use. And then, of course, May 27th, we're going to be talking about mezzanines. CPDP approved. You get your points. That's going to help you so that you don't have to rush as much at the end of the year when you get asked by these associations to say, hey, where's your continuing education points? It's going to be easy. You just got to sign on your Wednesdays, and you're going to get your points. So moving forward, of course, for our 14 training sessions coming up from June to December, please sign up. We've already got a lot of sign-ups, a lot of people signing up for it. This is great. Be part of the group. Be able to work with us and discuss these issues as we move on. Hopefully, we'll be able to get out and see the world a little bit more as we move into June. But yeah, definitely sign up. If you look at the right-hand side on the there's an offers tab. If you click on that button, it takes you right to our website. That'll help you get signed right up, and then we can add you to the list. We're looking forward to seeing you there, definitely. Of course, just to give you an idea of what RSM does, we also do plans examination services. That's what Mandy works essentially on. She definitely is great to help out with your project. Let us help you. So plans examination, we help out with that support, inspection, mentorships, and we also do our training sessions. So once we start opening up, we're also going to be going back to doing some on-site training sessions to help people through some of these items and give them our take on how to apply them. Our sort of disclaimer, of course, we work very hard in order to get you the information that we know as best as our knowledge that we know. But of course, please satisfy yourself. We definitely try our best, but there's different opinions. Keep in mind that the authority having jurisdiction is the one that applies these rules. We may have different opinions based on the fact of how they apply it. So please talk to your CBO, talk to your supervisor. If you're a designer, please talk to the municipality first. Say, this is what I heard. Is this how you apply it? You definitely want to make sure you have that type of respect for that, because this is our opinions, and it's definitely to get you to get talking about this and to get better, but you got to double check with the powers that be. So what we'll do is we'll move into more of an in-depth question period. We're going to do our best to answer these. Some of them on the fly here can be difficult, but we're going to do our best to sort of get some directions. Mandy's going to come in here, and we're going to start talking about questions. So if there's anybody who wants to stay on for overtime, we're at just after 10. So if you want to stay on and partake in the question period, that's great. If not, we'll definitely see you next week. Or 2 weeks,
All
not next
right.
week, 2 weeks.
I'm just going to go through the question and answer board here. So these are not going to be in any particular order, Gerald. I'm just going to kind of go through the list. Someone was asking about, as per Ontario Health and Safety Act, eyewash stations are required. Is this required or enforced by building inspectors? So that's certainly not something I've been looking for on plans examination. I know that.
Yeah, no, I think I don't think it's through the building code. I do know that once you do have an eyewash station, then you do need to comply with certain provisions of the building code. One of them would be backflow prevention. I know there's a requirement that says that you have to ensure that the eyewash station is not downstream of a backflow. You want to make sure it's on the potable side. That makes sense, right? You don't want to have that processed water or whatnot spraying into somebody's eyes. But I don't believe that that's a requirement through the Ontario Building Code. It would be through the Ontario Health and Safety Act.
Next question. Do you class the drawing rooms part of the farm building? Do you require them to be separated as per 3151 of the farm code?
What type of room?
Drawing rooms.
Drawing. Like drawing
Drying.
something? Driving.
Drying.
Drying rooms. I see.
Drying. Yes, sorry.
Yes, that is a good point. Thanks for bringing up. There is a provision that talks about the drying rooms, and I think that probably came back from the tobacco when we used to have a lot of tobacco barns. And I think there is definitely an argument that needs to be complied with.
If the quality of flammable and combustible liquids in a lab does not create fire or explosion hazards, then 3213 does not apply. Is that correct?
So we'd have to pull the code up for that one. Maybe if you want to pull that up while you do that. I see one on here that I could talk about here while you do that. In rural areas, what are you seeing for fire protection? So I think this is definitely a discussion for farm buildings. There's no requirement for fire protection per se, like on-site water in the actual code itself. When you're dealing with an industrial building, especially if you're dealing with a Part 3 building, then there are requirements for on-site water. So you'd have to deal with dry hydrants and water storage. But the farm building code itself does not have specific provisions related to on-site fire, on-site water. I see something about hoop buildings. Hoop buildings themselves, they are, of course, a difficult one to apply. They basically drag some of them. I don't know what size you're thinking of, but I've seen some of them. They can literally drag around the field and put them where they want to. Technically, if they're over the 60 meter square, which is the tent requirement, that's what I do anyways. I try to think of them as a tent. If I try to tell most of the people that I deal with, keep them under the 60 meter square, that you can do whatever you want with them. You don't need building permits. But some of them say, well, they're bigger. I say, well, have two of them, and they sit beside each other. I don't know if that's a cop out, but really, I don't want to be dealing with the farmer every year as he puts up hoop houses and starts moving them around. So that's how I typically deal with hoop houses, is try to convince the farmer to deal with them as tents, keep the requirements and the size requirements under. I guess even if it was considered a tent and it was over the 60 square meters, you could still issue a permit. There's no engineering required up until I think it's the 2,700 square feet. So you could deal with it that way too, but it is a bit of a pain.
Do you want me to share my screen there, Gerald, so you can see
Sure.
6213? I'll try and zoom in here.
So let's maybe go through that question again.
Okay, the question was, if the quantity of flammable and combustible liquids in a lab does not create fire or explosion hazard, then 6213 does not apply. Is that correct?
I see the ventilation requirements in total. If we go back up to the very beginning there, Mandy, where it talks about this ventilation.
Sorry, my computer's froze here. I'm trying.
No, that's all right.
We had some technical difficulties this morning with our online code.
As you're going up there, my gut feeling is the reason that they have ventilation of laboratories is most of the requirements are always talking about flammable combustible liquids. I'd have to look through that particular section of the code if it's not just about flammable combustible liquids, but my gut, so it says this subsection applies where flammable liquids and combustible liquids are used. So definitely, it's got to have flammable and combustible liquids used in a manner that would create a fire explosion hazard. So if cannabis facilities, if they're using ethanol, butane, propane, then they would, I would see that they fit into, like I said in the presentation, I'd say they fit into laboratories for sure in the requirements of 6.2.13.
Okay. Does RSM do fire code review? Do we want to address that now?
Most of our work is always done through municipalities. At this point, we support municipalities. We don't do any private sector work for regards to architects, engineers. I think it's more of our business model of supporting municipalities, but there are lots of great fire code and building code consultants out there. I've seen lots of reports from them, so definitely reach out, do a Google search. They can definitely help you. But with regards to municipalities, if you're looking for assistance with the review and you want us to review either the entire plan review, the cannabis facility, or you want us to do a review for just the cannabis section, yes, that is what we do. We support municipalities with regards to their plan review services. So please reach out.
Another question, in rural areas, what are you seeing for fire protection?
Yeah, I covered that one. So that
Fire
one's
hydrants,
essentially,
water source,
I think in rural areas, if it's zoned farm and it's a farm building, there is no requirements for on-site water. But if it is a Part 3 building, then yes, it needs to meet the provisions of requiring on-site water supply through the appendix. That particular situation, you know what, I know I've gotten into situations where they've said the combustible content is very low because there is an exception in there with regards to the appendix for on-site water, that it's an extremely low combustible content. So I don't need on-site water. Good point. But I think that is an appendix. So it's not the actual code. I think if you were wanting to consider no on-site water, you would talk to your fire department. And I don't know, do you want to do that with this special fire hazard in the extraction area? I'll be honest, the past couple of projects I've done, as soon as I said to them, do you do extraction? And then they say, yes. And then I say, well, do you realize the implications with regards to explosion protection and combustible liquid protection? They usually back off and they don't put that into their project because it is expensive, extremely expensive to add these provisions. So when you ask the question and you know someone's coming in with a cannabis facility, I would ask the question right up front to sort of either it's in or it's out, so that you don't make it a surprise when you walk in later on. All of a sudden you see all these test tubes and you're like, what is this? It's great to ask it at the beginning.
Most of these facilities have individual grow rooms with specific types of door hardware. Since these rooms are not intended to be occupied on a continued basis, would the OBC requirements, height and operation, etc., for the door hardware be applicable?
So I think that if you're dealing with a farm building, that provision in the code is specific, saying you need to address the fire code with regards to latching and opening. So yes, it applies. I'd say those growing rooms have to have the same type of latching that is in. So because I think that the building code itself specifically brought into the farm building those provisions. So for a cannabis facility, I would think that yes, you should deal with latching and special keys and knowledge, all that stuff in all areas of the building. Because essentially now, if you look at the farm code and you apply the strict interpretation, you could use a sliding door as an exit. You could use a sliding window as an exit, and you can use a sliding window with a ladder outside. So it's a lot less onerous in the farm code. That's why I think when they brought in this sentence, they said if it's a farm building with a cannabis facility, we now have to go back to the fire code with regards to the compliance options.
Okay, one question here. Are there food premise requirements for hand wash sinks, washroom location?
I never had thought of that, to be honest. My gut feeling says I don't see where it would require that. Now I know in 3.7 there's requirements for food. That's a good question.
I haven't had one where food's being produced.
And maybe that's the key. Like, I know they're producing these oils as additives for food, right? For the edible market. Whether I would consider it a food operation, I have not, but that's an interesting comment.
Yeah, that's not something I've seen yet. Someone's going back to, do you class the cannabis drawing rooms part of the farm building? Do you require them to be separated as per 3151 of the farm code? I had an engineer argue it was humidifiers, no fuel fired appliances, and the drawing room was not required to be separated from the rest of the farm building. So that's that question we were just dealing with in terms of
I would believe that, and I've asked that question on my plan review too, unless I'd have to pull up the farm code, but if it's a drying room and it's drying the material just like they used to dry tobacco, I don't think it's any different then it applies. Now, was there in the farm code, I'm just pulling it up here, I don't know if there's any provisions that specifically talk about a fuel-fired appliance, if that makes a difference or not. And what was that code reference that we were using for the farm building code?
Well, the question came in as specific to 3151. So that one talks about fire resistance ratings, except as provided in 3152 and 3153. Fuel fired appliances in farm buildings of low human occupancy shall be located in service rooms or service space designed for that purpose. Is that I don't know if that's the most applicable code article, is it?
I'm just pulling it up here. So we're in the farm code, right? So that we wouldn't be in the building code. I think we can agree because it's a farm building, and we've been told to sort of move into that. So 3151 talks about the fuel-fired appliances in farm buildings of low human occupancy need to be separated by that 30 minutes. Well, is a drying room a service room or service space? I don't think it is. That's service room would be something that would contain building services that would heat the building. I guess maybe the argument is it's heating that room to dry it out.
Sentence 2, Gerald.
In farm buildings of low human occupancy, rooms used for crop drying in which farm machinery is repaired shall be separated. I'd say it's required. I don't see anything in here that talks about whether it's gas or not gas. I would argue that it's required. All we can do, and it's funny, I know as a building official, all we have is the words in the code, and we just do our best based on what it says. Now, somebody always seems to see that theirs is a little bit different to what the code is talking about. Maybe in Appendix A, it talks a little bit more about it, but I'd say there is a requirement there for fire separation in drying rooms based on that provision. But again, like we've said, the authority having jurisdiction, don't be afraid to review the issue, make your opinion. And if you think, well, what is the real issue here? If you're satisfied based on the report from an engineer that indicates that, it's a lot, there's not as much material, it's not fuel fired. And if you are confident in him, then I don't make your call, make your decision. At least if you do go that route, you're sharing the liability with that engineer. So for me, it's not that I always say, well, an engineer has said this is what it is, and I always have to go with it. I think sometimes, yes, I think you need to look at their and respect their sort of expertise. But on the other hand, you got to also look at it objectively and make your call. I think in my case, if it was a very large drawing room, I would ask the question, and I would likely ask for that fire separation.
Someone's kind of just made a comment question. So if they were making edible items for the market, would it not be dealt with through the health unit?
So quite a few years ago, the code used to refer to the health unit for 3.7 of the building code. So it used to be that as building officials, we never dealt with that extra hand washing sink. We never dealt with washrooms being opening directly into a restaurant. And so all that stuff was brought into the building code for us to enforce. So I think the intent is that we deal with food through 3.7. It's not dealt with through the health unit. If the health unit, and you have a good relationship with them, and you of course want to get them on board, but you got to be careful. If they're asking for something that you can't put your finger on in the Ontario Building Code, then you really might be outside of the scope. So I really think it's our role. If you consider this a food premise, maybe they are taking the editable oils and they're making food out of it, like the gummies and the cookies or something like that, then I think it would be up to you to enforce the provisions of 3.7. If it's an industrial building, if it's a farm building, then of course those provisions aren't specifically dealt with. So I think maybe in that case, you may want to get some help with the health unit, or at least recommend applying 3.7, but you may have some enforcement problems with the farm building code, because of course it is a bit of a weaker document on the requirements.
One more kind of a two-part comment question. Just that we didn't touch much on the plumbing systems within these buildings. So most of these establishments are entering into abandoned industrial occupancies. How does Part 11 come in with dealing with existing plumbing systems when the water piping could have been used for processes in the past that may have been contaminated by, say, a plant process that is now going to be used for a potable water system?
So I think with regards to plumbing and Part 11, of course, when you look at the provisions of the plumbing, I think the way it's discussed is it's a reduction performance level if the plumbing system is affected or altered. I think if you have a process system where it's used for process, it's likely not using potable water material that is permitted in the code as a potable pipe material. That's out. If it was a potable material, then I think there may be some provisions you could use in Part 11 based on that issue of affecting the plumbing system, to say you need to get some type of potability report of the existing plumbing. But I think Part 11 would likely fit into that. That's a deep one. I'd have to really dig in deep, but that's my thoughts off the cuff.
Okay. I got one more question here. If a growing area requires the space to be conditioned to contain more CO to promote plant growth, would this be considered a controlled atmosphere as per NFBC 423, or would an HVAC engineer look after protection for this type of situation?
You know, in Part 6 of the code, it talks about the fact that all buildings need to be ventilated in accordance with ASHRAE 62.1 or one of those ASHRAE requirements. And I think that there tells you that you need a mechanical engineer to tell you that the ventilation requirements have been met in accordance with the ASHRAE standard. For me, I typically always require mechanical drawings for the buildings, because how do you know that it meets ASHRAE, especially if it's a cannabis facility where you're talking about these issues of CO2 being introduced into the room. We've got issues of course, just the dust. I've heard a lot about, and we had some people chat about the fact that there are some issues with breathing in the dust. We had one project, I remember, Mandy, where they had hoods. And Mandy asked, I think you asked the question, where's your explosion protection?
Yeah.
And the issue was, I think, more of the smells and the, was it the dust?
Yeah, it was for occupant, it was just for, not necessarily required by the code. It was just to make the occupants more comfortable.
Yeah.
So that particular one came back as. So they were put in, but they had no function in terms of what was required for the building code.
Gotcha. Yeah. But I still think that if you get any type of cannabis facility, I think you need a mechanical system that's been designed by somebody under ASHRAE. Now that's under the industrial building, under the code. when we get into our farm building codes, we have a lot less levers to pull in order to require things. So you just have to keep that in mind when you're asking for these provisions in a farm building.
That's all the questions that there are, Gerald.
Good stuff. Well, thanks a lot. I'm glad that we all were able to take part. Thanks everybody for sticking around for question period. We really thought that it would be maybe a better idea to try to leave as many of the questions, especially the specific ones at the end, so that people could leave when they wanted and stick around for the questions. And I noticed that we had about a good 160 people that just stayed around to hear the questions. So, but again, everyone who's here, thanks for coming. Send in your comments. Help us be better, and definitely we'll see you on the next webinar in 2 weeks where we talk about the Part 1011 story. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again.
Okay, bye everybody.
See ya.